All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here, and today I'm going to be talking about the best decks in Pokemon Pocket right now. We are about 1 week into this new Ruler of the Skies B4 season. There's been a bunch of online tournaments. We have a bunch of data, and the metagame has been progressing and evolving and adapting. Things are already a lot different than they were just a few days ago, and it's Friday, and on Friday I like to cover the best decks that you guys should be playing. Ranked battles aren't out yet. However, there are a bunch of huge and awesome online tournaments that are going to be coming up in the upcoming days. The one that I'm going to be talking about, at least today, is PMPT number 41, and I would definitely recommend that you guys go and register. We're also going to be live streaming it this weekend, and it's actually tomorrow, Saturday, August 8th at noontime Eastern. So go register, link down in the description below. It's always a great time, and I always have a lot of fun, and maybe you'll do well, and maybe you guys, you watching this will actually win the tournament and be highlighted on the channel, right? It's always really fun to see players come out and hopefully, do well. But let's dive right into the deck lists, guys. We're going to be hopping on over to pocketmads.com to pull up all of these different deck lists. And of course, we do have the QR codes available. There will be timestamps down in the description below if you guys want to move through and take a look at those decks. All right, let's get into it. So the first deck we're going to talk about is Hoopa EX. Now, this is going to be Greninja Hoopa. And I honestly do think that Greninja and Hoopa do go well together. This is a deck list that has definitely dropped a little bit in play in favor of just sort of the pure dark type Hoopa deck. Now, a lot of people do think that because Hoopa also deals bench damage, you don't necessarily need Greninja. I mean, it does make sense, right? Like, you're already kind of pinging the bench with the Shadow Bullet attack from Hoopa EX. However, keep in mind that Greninja is a broken card, right? So if you wanted to play Hoopa and you wanted to play a dark type deck that was a little bit more of a high roll type version of it, I do think Greninja is still a top tier option. This is going to be a deck from Portland Poliwags, who went 10-1-1 and got first place at a recent large online tournament. I do think that Hoopa EX is one of the premier cards now in Pokemon Pocket. I do think that no matter how you're kind of playing Hoopa, whether it is this version or the kind of the mono dark type version, which we will talk about. Both decks just play dark energy only, but when I say dark only, I mean like dark only Pokemon. There's that version of Hoopa, which we will be also mentioning in today's video, because that is certainly one of the top decks in the game. I still think that Hoopa with Greninja is still a top tier archetype, and it really just comes down to like a tremendous amount of spread damage on the board. I do really like the Mega Sableye inclusion in here, so double Hoopa, double Deceptive Needle, double Greninja is a really, really strong core, right? What you're gonna do is be really aggressive, but you're also going to just have so much extra damage that comes out for so little energies, and you're almost always going to be able to commit those extra energies either to a second Hoopa to come in later and hit for 100 damage, or you could just start attaching to your Mega Sableye if you can get it on the bench and then come in and be really aggressive. One thing I do want to note, because to me, one of the biggest progressions so far of this season, and again, we're about a week in, is going to be the rise of Mega Lucario. Mega Lucario, to me, is actually probably the most well-positioned deck in the metagame right now. It's kind of beating, like, all of the top-tier archetypes, right? Whether it is, Mega Manectric, whether it is, like, the grass decks like Vespiquen or Suicune Baxcalibur. Mega Lucario, to me, is the deck that's kind of coming in and benefiting from all of the new decks, and its matchup spreads into those decks. And I think it's just because Mega Lucario can hit for that 170, 180 damage range, which I really think is like a really big deal. Now, you would think, because all of these Pokemon in this deck list do get KO'd by Mega Lucario, potentially, you'd be surprised to know that really the Hoopa decks are the only decks at the top of the metagame in terms of popularity that are continuing to have a positive winning matchup into Mega Lucario. So, moving forward, I genuinely do think that Hoopa is kind of the future. It's one of the decks that will certainly stick around throughout the season, but especially more so in the next week, where Mega Lucario, I think, is kind of making a rise. When you take a look at the last 2 or 3 days of tournament wins, Mega Lucario has been the most successful archetype, and Hoopa is kind of one of the only archetypes that can deal with it. And again, I do think the bench damage and the aggressive factor of Hoopa is a really big part of that. So shout out to Hoopa EX, shout out to Greninja, shout out to Portland Poliwag. Here is the code. The code should be working for you guys. What's really nice is that you can actually, and I didn't even know this because I haven't even tried it, but you can actually take a screenshot on your phone. If you're watching this video on your phone, you can take a screenshot of the code and then actually in-game use a screenshot of a code to import it in. You don't actually have to scan in real time. So screenshots of codes do work for putting the decks into Pokemon Pocket, which is actually really cool. But anyway, there you go. There's the code. Next up, let's talk about Mega Manectric, right? This is a deck that I actually put in S tier on Tuesday's tier list video. It was so consistent. It was doing so extremely well in that first week of the metagame that I really thought this was a deck that was kind of going to possibly take over. However, as we know, the metagame shifts, things change. And right now, I think that Mega Manectric is still a top tier archetype, but the metagame as a whole right now isn't nearly as kind to Mega Manectric. And again, I do think Mega Lucario was a pretty big reason for that. So what's interesting is that Mega Manectric with the new Heliolisk and the whole Clement's backpack package, certainly one of the best decks in the game, might in fact be the best kind of pure lightning type deck that we have currently this season. And by that, I mean like non kind of Oricorio, cheese style deck list. This to me is still at the top. This is going to be Baka 93799's deck here from the TBC TDL pop-up. This is a really strong deck, one that I still feel really strongly about, but keep in mind, it has about the same win rate into Mega Lucario that Mega Vespiquen does. And as we know, Mega Vespiquen has been by far the most successful new deck to enter into the metagame. And again, a big reason for that, I think, is because it's a grass type. Now, what's interesting is that Mega Manectric is weak to fighting, so it will get KO'd by Mega Lucario, and that's always been a bit of a downside. Mega Vespiquen is not weak to fighting, but it has about 20 less HP with Leaf Cape, so it still gets KO'd by Mega Lucario. So what we're seeing is a lot of the best decks in the game are actually not these Stage 2 rare candy decks, right? And the deck that is able to kind of one and KO all of these Pokemon in these non-Stage 2 rare candy decks is Mega Lucario. I'm going to be talking about Mega Lucario a lot in this video, so that's kind of a big progression. And again, since I just mentioned that I think Mega Lucario is drastically on the rise, I do think that Mega Manectric is kind of on the fall. So if I had to adjust my tier list today from Tuesday, I would actually probably move Mega Manectric down and move Mega Lucario up a peg. And again, the tier list to the metagame is very fluid. A week from today, things might be very different. I still think Mega Manectric is a very, very solid deck list. However, just not as kind. The general kind of meta matchups and the progression of the metagame, it hasn't been, I guess, as fruitful for Mega Manectric as it was in those first few days. But into almost everything else, I feel pretty confident that this is such a strong archetype. It really is. Elegant Cape might be the kind of the biggest factor here. Getting that Elegant Cape onto your Mega Manectric so you can live a hit from Mega Lucario might be the difference between being able to win or lose. I think there might be a case to kind of play multiple copies of that. This deck list is playing May. Again, just an example of a Mega Manectric deck that did extremely well at a recent online tournament. So I wanted to highlight it. Shout out to Baka. What do you guys think of Mega Manectric? It's certainly going to be pretty popular this season. I think it's a top 5 most played deck so far this season. Still incredibly strong, but might not be kind of a top 2 deck so far, or at least at the moment. But so far this season, it really has been. One of these decks that hasn't won a lot of tournaments, but has been top 4 at like almost every tournament, right? So it's just kind of the way that things go. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, things like Mega Vespiquen and Hoopa have really ended up winning a ton of tournaments. And more recently, that's been Mega Lucario, just winning a ton of tournaments. Here's the code for Mega Manectric and Heliolisk, a deck that I truly, really like. I think Mega Manectric is, again, I say it all the time, kind of the most underrated Mega Pokemon, and this new Heliolisk, spread damage kind of package is actually really, really strong, and I think it's something that we need to, keep our eye on moving forward. I think this is going to be one of the stronger cores for Lightning archetypes for the upcoming future. Next up is going to be Fonto Daso Dasosa. His deck, he went 10-2. I believe this is a first place finish. This is going to be the other side of that Hoopa coin, right? So whether you wanted to play Greninja, more of a high roll version of it, or if you wanted to play kind of a pure dark version of Hoopa with things like Darkrai and Mega Absol, here you go. And I still think that this is kind of an S tier archetype. Extremely high win rate over the last 3 days. This is right up there with Mega Lucario. One of the few decks that continues to have a strong matchup into Mega Lucario. And I think that it's going to continue to be probably one of the more significant decks in the entire game. Starting Plains does bring Hoopa here up to 170. It does bring Mega Absol up to 190. You're going to be out of range of getting KO'd by Vespiquen EX, even with weakness, which is a really big deal. 190 on that Mega Absol should be also a really big deal into Mega Lucario, but certainly they can still, take a KO possibly. But yeah, this is a deck that just really feels strong, and I really did try to tell people about Mega Hoopa, or not Mega Hoopa, but Hoopa EX when the card was released. I was like, this card is such a big deal. It's got everything going for it. It really is kind of a throwback to these sort of basic 2-prize EX Pokemon that dominated the metagame, last year and much of the metagame in Pokemon Pocket's history. I think that this deck has literally everything going for it. You have high HP, incredibly strong, basic Pokemon. You have access now to starting planes, Lucky Ice Pop. The new Deceptive Needle is a deceptively really powerful card. It's really nice because it actually can get 10 damage off on your first turn, even if you're not able to attach an energy or attack. That means if your opponent is going to turn 1 retreat, you can actually already tag that Pokemon and then set things up for a Cyrus maybe later in the game. This deck plays double Cyrus, double Pokeball, double Research. One small balloon, which I think does make sense. In the deck list, you can retreat Mega Absol for free and retreat Darkrai EX for an additional energy. One Repel, right? So Repel is a card that I think is worth playing given the current state of the metagame. Definitely an underrated card. Double Cyrus and Repel, I really, really like that. Field Blower as well to get rid of those stadiums. Yeah, it's a really, really good deck. It's just such a unique thing. When you have Hoopa in the active with Needle and you have a Darkrai on the bench kind of backing it up, it's a ton of damage. It's a ton of damage to the active. It ends up being like, what is that, 70 or no, it's 60 damage to the active and 20 to the bench for 1 energy on 150 HP Pokemon. Basically, it really stacks up. If Hoopa can stay out there for 2 or 3 turns, it's already done enough to somewhat win the game. And then you have your Darkrai or your Mega Absol in the back to finish things off. And it really is just a phenomenally strong strategy. I feel strongly that Hoopa EX is potentially the best new card in the game. But things like Vespiquen, things like Sharpedo, things like Heliolisk, there's a lot of really strong stuff that was added. But Hoopa EX, to me, kind of is that guy, and I think it probably will be moving forward. It's weird that they buffed the Dark archetype as much as they did. And what's interesting is that Hoopa is strong enough to kind of just be the centerpiece of these Dark archetypes, right? We're not really seeing a lot of Zoroark. We're not seeing a lot of Hydreigon. It's kind of just Hoopa. It's Hoopa Dex, because Hoopa is that guy, which is interesting. To not really see a metagame with a lot of Zoroark and a lot of Hydreigon, because those have been kind of the the front runners, the kind of the face of the Dark archetype for quite some time now. But Hoopa might be that guy now. It might be, he might be that guy. So very interesting. Shout out to Fonto de Sosa at the TBC Presents Zaster's Bash. A really, really strong deck. Here is the code. And again, if you were to choose between either of these Hoopa decks that I've showcased today, whether it's Greninja or Dark, I think Greninja is less consistent, but feels stronger. Like, if the board gets set up, you kind of feel confident that, if you do draw those cards in the way that you want to, you're probably going to be able to beat like any deck in the game. This is a deck that's much more consistent, but sometimes you will feel like some games just aren't winnable if your opponent also is playing high roll and they kind of, draw the Infinity Stones, which they do sometimes, Sometimes your opponent goes full Thanos on you and it doesn't feel great, right? So would you rather play a high roll deck or a consistency deck? It really becomes down to personal preference. Both are very strong. Both have similar win rates. One seeing more play. This version here sees a bit more play than Greninja right now, but they've both been very successful. Next up, let's talk about Mega Rayquaza. Let's talk about, this kind of stuff going on right now. I feel like this is still a very strong archetype, but keep in mind, I do think, at least that the way that the metagame has been going, Gouging Fire and Mega Rayquaza as a whole is an archetype that just doesn't feel as strong as sort of the top 3, decks currently in the metagame, right? To me, it's that next tier below, which is totally fine, because decks in that tier below oftentimes do still win tournaments, and they are very good choices for ranked battles and whatnot. The upside to Mega Rayquaza is that, you don't really care what's going on in the metagame, right? This is a deck that can deal with Oricorio, doesn't have to worry about Chingling item lock. It's consistent, it's powerful, you can one-hit KO stuff. So this is a deck that I don't really think will care too much about what other decks are seeing play. That being said, Mega Lucario is a Pokemon that can one-hit KO Mega Rayquaza, which can be sort of a difficult challenge. This is a deck that doesn't have a ton of room, so, playing things like Protective Poncho or even playing, a Giant Cape on your Mega Rayquaza seems like a good option, but at the end of the day, it's like, what are we cutting, right? So Ancient Booster Capsule is kind of the choice here. We are kind of front-loading this deck list. We're going to bring Gouging Fire up to 150 HP, which is really strong. It's hitting for 100 damage. It's a great Pokemon. It's a great strategy. But keep in mind, if you're going up against certain decks that don't really care too much about Gouging Fire, like, you will just get one-hit KO'd once certain things get set up. So I really like Mega Rayquaza. Its win rate has been about 50% throughout this entire season so far, which might not seem very good, but into, all of the top meta decks, its win rate is also pretty close to 50%. It's going to have some better matchups, some worse matchups, but to me, it is definitely still like a top 5, top 6 deck in the game right now. Maybe not as strong as we kind of thought it would be, or it was initially stronger than we thought it would be, but then it really settled. It didn't kind of push to that like tier 0 S tier placement, at least not yet. It definitely might. But I do think that it kind of fit the bill for being counter-meted with Mega Lucario, just as, some other decks did in the metagame, right? A lot of the strongest decks in the game are Pokemon that have about 180 or less HP, right? Like, that's just the reality here, whether it's Hoopa, whether it's Absol, whether it's Rayquaza, whether it's Vespiquen, whether it's Suicune. A lot of these Pokemon are not like these big kind of stage 2 Mega Pokemon that are, not able to get KO'd by Mega Lucario, right? So, since people just aren't really playing those stage 2 decks, Mega Lucario is very well positioned, and Mega Rayquaza kind of just fits into that I don't know, it fits into that threshold of HP Pokemon. So there might be a progression this season where, those stage 2 decks come back and they can just not have to worry about Mega Lucario KOing them in the late game. Definitely something for us to keep our eye on. But the issue is, all of these decks that we were kind of talking about today are on the left side here, and then the stage 2 decks are on the right side of this spectrum, and Mega Lucario is kind of right in the middle. And there's not a lot of decks that can kind of be in the middle, right? It is sort of a very unique spot. Honestly, I would say Mega Rayquaza kind of is in the middle, in the sense that it can also want to KO Pokemon, which is kind of a big deal, but it has a little bit less HP than Lucario, right? It has 10 less HP. So it's interesting. It's such a weird spot. Breakpoints right now are becoming increasingly more important. Damage thresholds, the ability to KO certain Pokemon, really, really definitive stuff in Pokemon Pocket right now. Fighting type decks do it better than anything else. Mega Lucario, the best fighting type deck. There you go. There's Mega Rayquaza, Gouging Fire. This is the list that I'm choosing here to highlight today. There's going to be so many different, dragon type decks. I really like the Ancient Toolbox deck. That's really unique. Things with Dragonite. There was a Goudra deck as well that did well so recently. So, I think that there's a lot of room for the Dragon archetypes. I'm just not entirely confident that any of those will really surpass Mega Rayquaza decks, or even just this Gouging Fire version of Mega Rayquaza, because it really ends up kind of being, like the top. It's so far, it's been kind of the top deck, in the metagame. So, again, a really solid deck. Maybe it can kind of get pushed up into that S tier category, but certain things just are really strong. And this is a deck that, it's got a couple of moving pieces. It is strong. It can be pretty consistent. It is, in fact, pretty consistent, but, I would say this is extremely good, but not really on the level of absolutely broken, which certain things kind of seem to be this season, right? So anyway, there you go. Next up is actually going to be Sleep Altaria. You guys might clown on me for including this, but once again, guys, Mega Lucario is on the rise. The only real deck in the game that can significantly kind of keep Mega Lucario down a peg is going to be Sleep Altaria, and kind of the only Psychic type deck that's that relevant in the current metagame. Maybe some Diancie stuff can kind of float around with Giratina. There is some potential there, but keep in mind when it comes to the Psychic archetype, we haven't actually had a lot of buffs. We haven't had a lot of inclusions added recently, other than Mega Diancie, which again isn't something that's at the forefront of the metagame. So Mega Altaria, to me, I think is still that option. And I think that it's very possible that, a week from now, one of the more significant meta progressions in Pokemon Pocket is that Altaria comes back, that Sleep comes back, and we put a little bit more pressure on those Mega Lucarios who are, operating at a pretty high level given the current state of the metagame right now. So that's why I'm mentioning it. I really do think this is still going to be a really strong deck. Not as much Sleep counter this season as there ever has been over the last couple of seasons. So what that tells me is that, with Lucario seeing more play, with less, PCL, less Sleep counter seeing play, the metagame is kind of primed and ready for Sleep Altaria to come back and really cement itself as like a top tier archetype. And it already is to a degree, but it's certainly not as popular as you might imagine in online tournaments. It would not be something, I would not be surprised at all if Sleep Altaria came through and won, one of these tournaments. It's just sort of, we're getting to that place in the metagame. We're at that point in time where, to me, it really does feel like Altaria's ready. It's ready to come in and remind people that this is, in fact, one of the stronger decks in the game. I know people are kind of tired of it, but again, when it comes to Psychic and default counterplaying fighting type stuff, like, this is the deck that people are probably going to choose. If this becomes popular, and if it becomes a deck that does very, very well at a couple of tournaments, in a row, then all of a sudden the metagame then shifts around this, and things start to balance out. So this is a metagame with so many strong decks, so many weird interactions and matchup spreads that it'll probably take about 3 to 4 weeks before things to really settle, and by that time, the next set will be coming out. So this is going to be a pretty crazy season. You're going to want to stay tapped in here to Pocket Mads, to the YouTube channel on PocketMads.com to kind of know exactly what you should be playing. This is actually Wall 456 deck from the Plasma Daily number 18. He went 6 and 2 and 2 with it. Just kind of a recent example of Sleep Altaria doing well. Here's the code, by the way. But I still feel confident this is something that's going to rise back up and be tremendously relevant moving forward. I just don't really see a world where it's not, quite honestly. It has to be. Everything is kind of pointing in this direction. I've seen it happen multiple times. Right now is kind of the perfect storm, like I said, for Psychic and Sleep Altaria to come in and be a strong choice. So we'll see. But now by the time when Rain comes out, it might already kind of be, we might be past that progression, right? We might be on to the next. So you're going to want to stay tuned. Things are changing really rapidly. Next up is Mega Lucario. Here you go. So this is actually going to be twice A's 9-1-1 list from the Son of Pog tournament. Number 22, I believe they got first place. And here's the list. So it's Mega Lucario. That last card here is an X speed. It's going to be hard to show them all on the page at one time because Lucario decks are like one of decks. Like they're playing just one of so many cards. That's why there's so many different individual cards on the image. But yeah, I think that this is a great example of a really strong Mega Lucario deck. Maximum opportunities to increase damage output between Arena of Antiquity, and Fighting Coach Lucario. Tons of different damage modifications out here. One Ice Pop, one Poncho, double Copycat, Pokeball, and Research. We are playing two different Riolu. One does 20 damage, one does 32 EX Pokemon. It doesn't really matter which one you play, I'm going to be honest with you. So I know some people are going to have their preferences. 99.9% of the time, the Riolu. It doesn't really matter. There will be some times where it's like, oh, I can come in and just hit for 30, and like that adds up to be something relevant, especially with Arena, with Karina, things like that. Like leading this Riolu into like a Hoopa and getting, the damage modification out, like can be a pretty big deal. We're actually playing one Bonsly in this list, which is kind of the interesting part of the deck. Like that's what makes this definitely a little bit more strange. Not something you'll always see in Mega Lucario. During your opponent's next turn, attacks used by the defending Pokemon do minus 30 damage. So it's just a decent lead off. Like you throw it in there. It is a fighting type Pokemon, so it can get buffed, of course, by Arena of Antiquity, Fighting Coach, and Karina. So it's not terrible. It is kind of probably better than Tyrogue, but quite similar nonetheless. And then we're just playing a Sock, so we're not playing Hitmonlee or any bench damage in this deck, which is fine. I think that's totally fine. The thing is, when you're playing Fighting Coach and Arena and Karina, like these are things that buff your damage to the active Pokemon. And while Hitmonlee's a really strong card, it just doesn't hit the active, right? So it doesn't really get use out of that. We are playing one Cyrus nonetheless. So again, this is a deck that's really just about pressuring the active and then just going into Mega Lucario and one-hit KO sweeping your opponent. Because again, most things in the metagame right now are just one-hit KOable by Mega Lucario. So you don't necessarily have to worry about kind of targeting a Mega on the bench before it comes into the active. All you're really worried about is pressuring your opponent enough to bring in their Mega so that you can then bring in your Mega and then KO them, and then you win, right? Because most Megas in the game are going to get KO'd by Mega Lucario, at least the ones that are seeing play right now. And that's why I think Mega Lucario is a top-tier archetype. It's just a unique deck. It's something that, it's a deck that does something that just nothing else in the game does. And I find that to be really impactful, all of the online tournaments this weekend, if Lucario ends up stomping through everything, like no one should be surprised by that. It's just extremely well positioned. Like I said, beating almost every top tier meta archetype in terms of matchup data. However, it is about a 45% win rate, so a little bit under 50% into the Hoopa decks. So if it's not Lucario, it's probably Hoopa, or unless like both of those decks kind of fall out of bracket somewhere and something else comes in and just ends up winning, which does happen sometimes, but I would say the majority of the wins for the next week or so, and maybe this entire season, in fact, if things just go that way, going to be Hoopa or Mega Lucario. That's the reality here. Here's the code if you guys want to play Mega Lucario. To be honest, so many different ways you can play this deck. Like, it really doesn't matter as much as some people think. Sure, like if Psychic becomes popular, maybe you play like the Zygarde or something, right? Sock is a really good card, but keep in mind, it's sometimes it's better to not have the Psychic weakness, especially into things like Espeon, right? The Sleep Espeon. So, this is a deck list that can change. This is just one example of a Lucario deck that got first place. And I thought it was pretty unique, so I wanted to highlight it. But if you're playing Mega Lucario and you're playing some collection of fighting Pokemon to kind of keep your leadoffs consistent, like you're fine. You're gonna be just fine. Probably winning a lot of games. And trust me, if you haven't played Lucario in a while, try it out because it'll seem very good. Trust me, I think right now it's definitely one of the better options. All right, now let's get into like the weekly wild card, which isn't necessarily like a wild card, but it is something that I still have a lot of respect for, and one that I do think is still something that we should be mentioning, and that is Mega Sharpedo. This is going to be Golfer MT's deck from the TBC Notice late night tournament. This is a 6-3 list. This is Mega Sharpedo, 1 Wild Swing Gyarados, and double Chien Pao. Double Wallace, double Lucky Ice Pop, and double Soothing Shore and 1 Giant Cape. So the thing about Mega Sharpedo and these water type decks is that you really can build them a lot of different ways. One of the things that we all know right now is that, water is pretty well defined by accelerating water energies and KOing Pokemon with Chien Pao. Like, that's kind of how the water archetype has been operating for the last, I don't know, almost a year. I don't know how long it's been, like 6 months. And Mega Sharpedo is a really good way to do that. I think it's been a pretty decent deck this season. Now, Lightning was seeing a lot more play early on, but will end up seeing less play moving forward because Mega Lucario is becoming so significant. So, if things like Mega Lucario become a bit more, relevant, and there's less Lightning seeing play, then Mega Sharpedo has a much better time. Trust me, this is an archetype that really did not get off to a great start this season because of all of the Lightning decks and how much Manectric and Heliolisk was seeing play, right? So I really do think that people's maybe perception around Mega Sharpedo is actually a little bit inaccurate. Just to kind of, relate it to the overall kindness that the metagame was showing it. Right, in terms of just sort of the positioning in the metagame, right? And there's 2 main factors when you consider which decks you should be playing, right? One is just the inherent strength of the deck. How good is the deck? But then also how well positioned it is into the metagame, meaning how well it matches up into all of the other decks. Mega Sharpedo was a deck that to me was very clearly one of the strongest decks and strongest new Pokemon that we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket, but it wasn't that well positioned in this new metagame, at least early this season, and I think that's going to change moving forward, at least to a degree. Mega Sharpedo, it's something to keep your eye on, a deck that I really do feel strongly about. It is kind of high roll, but it's like high roll aggression. Gyarados Wild Swing is broken, Chien Pao is broken. This was a list that was somewhat popularized by Froggy X and Najord early in the season, and again, it did win some tournaments, it did do quite well, but then Mega Manectric became exceedingly popular. So you have 190 HP, which is a big deal. You can hit 130 to the bench, which is a massive deal. I think Mega Sharpedo, an incredible option, might be a deck that comes through and actually can compete into Mega Lucario and other top tier strategies like Mega Hoopa or Hoopa E. I keep saying Mega Hoopa, but Hoopa EX. So keep in mind, I know it's not something that's been, like in the top 3 and at any point this season, but it has that potential, and it's something I do not want you guys to sleep on. So here you go. Here is Mega Sharpedo, and a list that I really like, right? With double Shore, double Ice Pop, and Wallace, like you're kind of right in their face, but you're also really tanky, lots of HP, lots of healing, and I think that's a really big upside to Mega Sharpedo, which has 190 HP, which is a lot. This is not like a weak Pokemon. It's quite tanky. It's like Mega Manectric, but you're not weak to fighting, right? Which is like a big deal. 190 is a good number if you're not weak to fighting. That's for sure. Here's the code, guys, for Mega Sharpedo. Let me know what you guys think. And that's the video. Those are my kind of top tier decks. That's kind of my explanation, my feelings of the metagame and kind of the top decks right now as we go into this weekend. Again, guys, there's a really large community tournament here on Friday. It's actually probably live as you guys watch this. And then there's also, which I'm actually casting, by the way, with Spraggles on his YouTube channel, which is going to be a ton of fun. So if you're watching this on Friday, like maybe tune in to Spraggles Pocket and see if we're live. But also PMPT number 41 is also tomorrow. It's Saturday, which you guys should definitely register in. So there's going to be tournaments on Sunday. There's going to be so many awesome events for Pokemon Pocket. Things are really exciting, and a lot of people are kind of coming out and competing. And the next week, I think Ranked comes out, which is going to be crazy. So yeah, lots to talk about. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Go check out PocketMats.com, check out the Discord, and go register for PMPT number 41. All right, guys, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys next time. And yeah. Bye.